Hello everyone, welcome to today's Daf, Bava Kamma. Today's Daf is 66b, and as you can see it's blue skies and it's going to be the hottest day of the year here in Manchester, so let's dive straight in. So just finishing from the last Amud, 66a, Yosef raised an objection to Rabba from a Mishnah. If one robbed another of leavened bread and Passover elapsed in the meantime, so deriving benefit from it is prohibited, the robber may nonetheless return the worthless bread to the owner and say to him, "That which is yours is before you," and no conversation is required. Rabbi Yosef states his objection, but in this case, once a time of prohibition of leavened bread arrives, the owner certainly despairs of recovering his now worthless bread. And if it enters your mind to say that the owner's despair caused the robber to acquire the stolen item, why can he say to him, "That which is yours is before you"? He should be required to pay the owner full-fledged money rather than return the worthless food, as the bread now belongs to the robber. Rabba says to him in response, "When I say that the thief acquires the stolen item upon the owner's despair of recovery, it is when this owner despairs, and that thief wants to acquire the item. In this case, this one despairs, but that one does not wish to acquire the worthless bread." Even if the owner's despair of recovery serves to cause the robber or thief to acquire it, this does not occur without the owner's consent. This is because despair does not actually cause the robber or thief to acquire the item, and most it simply removes the owner's possession of it. If the robber or thief is not interested in acquiring the item after the prior owner rendered it ownerless, he does not acquire it. Abai raised an objection to Rabba from a Braita. The verse, if his offering is a burnt offering of the herd, Leviticus 1:3, indicates that one's offering must be his offering, but not an animal stolen from another. Kabana velo hagazel. If one steals the offering of another or takes it by robbery, his sacrifice is invalid, and he does not achieve atonement even if he sacrifices that animal. If the owner has despaired of recovering the animal, the sacrifice is valid. Although the owner's despair does not cause a thief or robber to acquire the item, in this particular case, the sages instituted an ordinance that despair affects acquisition. See Gittin 55b. Nevertheless, it is public knowledge that the animal was stolen. The sacrifice does not affect atonement for the one who sacrifices it. Rambam Sefer Avodah Hilchot Isurim HaMizbeach 5:7 in Kisah Mishnah there. See Hilchot Maaseh Karbonos 18:14. What are the circumstances of the case referred to by the Braita? If we say it is dealing with a stolen animal that the robber consecrates and sacrificed before the owner's despair of recovery, why do I need a verse to teach this? It is obvious that this is disqualified, as one cannot even consecrate an animal that does not belong to him. Rather, is it not referring to one who seeks to consecrate a stolen sacrifice a stolen item, a stolen animal after the owner's despair? And yet the Braita teaches that the animal cannot be consecrated by the theft. Conclude from the Braita that the owner's despair of recovering a stolen item does not cause the thief to acquire it. Abai assumed that the Braita is discussing a robber who stole a non-sacred animal and subsequently consecrated it as an offering. Consequently, if the owner's despair of recovery affects acquisition for the robber, the animal would belong fully to the robber. There's no reason he could not consecrate the animal and sacrifice it. Although there's a principle that a mitzvah that is performed through commission of a transgression is inherently flawed, the commentaries note that this principle is not applicable here, because it applies only to cases where the mitzvah itself is performed through commission of a transgression, whereas here the consecration occurred after the animal already belonged to the robber, says Tosfot. As if it belonged to him, he would be able to consecrate and sacrifice it. Rather said to Abai in a refutation of this proof. And according to your reason, consider that which is taught in a Braita is written with regard to a Zav, a man who experiences a gonorrhea-like discharge, and whoever touches his bedding shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be impure until the evening. Leviticus 15:5. This indicates that bedding on which the Zav lies can become richly impure and impart impurity only if it is his bedding, not if it is stolen bedding. Miskovel, his bedding, by Torah, a Zav or Zava impurify the items upon which they lie or sit during their period of impurity. Those items become primary source of its impurity, as are the zav and zava themselves. What are the circumstances of the case discussed in the Braita? If we say that he robbed another of wool and made it into bedding, is there anyone who says that a physical change that results from an action performed to a stolen item does not cause the thief to acquire it? Rather, what have you to say? The Braita must be speaking of a case in which the zav robbed another of bedding. Gazim mishkav the chavre. A zav does not transmit rich impurity by treading, lying, or riding on an item that does not belong to him. If he stole an item and stepped on it without touching it with his body, he renders it impure only if the owner has already despaired of recovering it. From Sefer Tahara, Hilchot Kalim 24:7. So too, the previous Braita is dealing with one who robbed another of an offering already consecrated. The Bava Kamma Daf, Rashi and the Ravid provide two explanations as to how this answers Abai's question. According to the first explanation, the Braita is referring to a case where the owner did not despair of recovering the animal, and it is teaching that not even the owner can sacrifice it at that point because it is not in his possession. According to the second explanation, the Braita is speaking about the situation after the owner despairs of recovering the stolen animal. Even if the owner's despair generally affects acquisition for the robber, in this case, the robber cannot acquire it because after its consecration, the animal is considered to belong to the temple treasury, not the owner. The reason the animal does not atone for the thief is that a consecrated animal cannot be stolen and become the thief's property, as it belongs to the temple treasury wherever it is located. Abai raised an objection to Rav Yosef from the Mishnah in Kalim 26:8 with regard to hides belonging to a homeowner. Orosh shel ba'al habayis. If a private individual does not intend to finish his hides beyond their present state, and a zav lies on them, a zav renders them initially impure. Hides belonging to a leather worker are generally intended for sale to others, and are consequently not rendered susceptible to its impurity through thought alone. They become susceptible to its impurity once some action is performed on them that serves to designate them for sitting, lying, or leaning. And that's the Rambam Sefer Tahara Hilchot Kalim 24:6. Hides and leather are susceptible to contracting impurity only if they are in a finished state. If a private individual uses a piece of hide or leather for a certain purpose, e.g. as a cot or a tabletop, and decides that this will be for its purpose, it is considered a finished product and susceptible for contracting impurity. But with regard to hides belonging to a leather worker, thought does not render them susceptible to rich impurity. Since this individual sells leather to others, when he uses a piece of leather for a household purpose and decides that this will be its fixed purpose, this is not considered a finished state, as he is likely to change his mind and sell the leather to one who will process it further and put it to different use. The Mishnah continues, if the hides are those of a thief who has stolen them from another, if the thief's thought renders them susceptible to its impurity, if they are those of a robber, if a thief steals the hide of another and decides that he will use it for lying upon, the hide will contract ritual impurity if the zav treads or lies on it. By contrast, a robber's thought in such a case serves to render the hide susceptible to impurity only if the owner has despaired of recovering it. Their halacha is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis of Rambam Sefer Tahara Hilchot Kalim 24:7. His thought does not render them susceptible to ritual impurity because he is not considered by the owner of the hide. The difference is that, unlike the case of a thief who steals the item stealthily, the identity of a robber who takes the item openly is known to the owner, and the owner harbors hope of finding the robber and getting the item back. Consequently, he does not despair of recovering his property. Rabbi Shimon says that the matters are reversed. In the case of a robber, the robber's thought renders them susceptible to impurity. If the hide are those of a thief, thought does not render them susceptible to its impurity because the owners have not despaired of recovering them, and the thief has not acquired the hide. Rabbi Shimon's reasoning is that a robber who seizes the item brazenly is a more common criminal to apprehend and to bring to justice than a thief. And although the two Tanaim of the Mishnah disagree as to which situation involves the owner's despair of recovery, whether robbery or theft, in any event, one can conclude from this Mishnah that the despair of the owner causes the thief or robber to acquire the item, as otherwise the perpetrator's thoughts about the hide would have no effect upon its status with regard to its impurity. Rav Yosef said to Abai in response, with what are we dealing here in this Mishnah? Is a case where the thief or robber trimmed. Kitsua, trimming. Trimming is the finishing of a piece of leather by cutting it to an exact size with smooth edges, including removal of any bulges or external material that may be stuck to the leather. While this process is essential for leather to serve a precise function, e.g. shoes, it is not necessary for a piece of leather that will be used as a mere covering, but the leather by cutting it. Although trimming a piece of leather is not sufficient change to constitute an acquisition by itself, it is effective in conjunction with the owner's despair. Rabbi Rav Hanan objects to this answer. But is it not the case that they taught this Mishnah here with regard to a leather tabletop, an itzbah? Rashi translates this term as a leather tabletop. The Gaonim say it refers to a leather covering for a saddle. The linguistic source of the word is uncertain. It is possible that it is from the root ayin sadi beis, meaning to fashion. And a leather tabletop does not require trimming, either due to the fact that its edges are not seen or because it is merely ornamental. Since it does not require trimming, this action should not be considered an act of acquisition at all. As we learned in the previous Mishnah, Kalim 26:7, where there is no work lacking for an item to be considered finished, one's thought renders it susceptible to impurity. When there is some work lacking for the item to be considered finished, thought does not render it susceptible to its impurity except for the case of a leather tabletop. So what's the footnote? A hide that is processed sufficiently to be used for a purpose is susceptible to its impurity through the treading of a zav, for the moment its owner mentally decides to use it in its current state for that purpose. If the item still requires work for it to be considered finished, one decision does not serve to make it susceptible to impurity. It is considered susceptible only when the work is completed. Bava Sefer Tahara, Kalim 24:6. Itzbah, leather tabletop. With regard to a hide that is used to cover a saddle to protect it from dirt, a mental decision is to use it in its current state serves to render it susceptible to its impurity, despite the fact that it has not been perfected into a finished product. Rama Sefer Tahara Kalim 24:6. Although further work is required to smooth out the edges, one thought can render it susceptible to impurity because people do not care if the leather tabletop has uneven edges. It is with regard to this case of a tabletop that the Mishnah distinguishes between a homeowner and a leather worker. Therefore, Rav's explanation is rejected. Rav Yosef's explanation is rejected. The Gemara suggests a different answer. Rather, Rav said that this matter was a difficulty posed by Rabbah to Rav Yosef for 22 years, and it was not resolved until Rav Yosef sat as the head of the yeshiva and resolved it in the following manner. Yasev Rav Yosef Bereisha. The Gemara in Tractate Harayot 14a relates that Rav Yosef was extremely knowledgeable, whereas Rabbah had extraordinary analytical skills. Since it was unclear of which of them was more suitable to serve as the head of the yeshiva in Pumbedita, the issue was referred to the Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael. They preferred the more knowledgeable scholar. Rav Yosef refused the mantle of leadership and deferred to Rabbah, who remained head of the yeshiva for 22 years until Rav Yosef assumed leadership. A change in name of an item. In the case of a stolen item, if its name has changed, the thief or robber has thereby acquired it and does not have to return the item itself. Rather, he must pay the owner its monetary value. Shulchan Aruch Hashemit, 353:1, and the Comment of Ramah 360:10. An item representing a change in status is similar to a physical change brought about by an action. Some commentators claim that a change in name is not sufficient for the theft for a thief to acquire an item is effective only when it occurs in conjunction with the owner's despair of recovery. As in the case described in the Mishnah, the owner had despaired of recovery Tosfot. Tosfot on 67a state that a change in the name is a form of acquisition independent of the owner's despair and is entirely equivalent to a physical change brought about by an action of the Rashba. What is the reason that a physical change through an action causes the thief to acquire the item? It is because there the stolen items were initially just wood, and now they are vessels. The same can be said for a change in name as well. Initially they are called a hide, and now they're called a tabletop. An abzarin, tabletop, apparently from the Middle Persian word awazin, a term that consists of a bar on a zen saddle. Most hold that it refers to a saddle cover. The Gemara asks a question with regard to a change in name. But what about the case of a beam? A marish. A beam mentioned here is intended to be used as a base beam in construction, as opposed to a beam used for roofing, known as a korah. Since the removal of a marish would require the dismantling of the entire building, the sages permitted a robber or thief to return the monetary value of the beam in such cases. If he can return a stolen item without causing such significant loss or expenditure of effort, he must return the item itself. Divrei Malkiel 438. Whether the change name, as initially when it was stolen, it was called a beam, and now after it's been placed in a building, it is called a joist, a talala. The source of the word is the Aramaic root ted lamed lamed, and it is similar to the Hebrew word sel, meaning shade. In this context, it means a central joist of the roof upon which other, less massive beams or boards were placed. And yet we learned in our Mishnah in Gittin 55a with regard to a stolen beam. If one stole a beam and built it into a building, although strictly speaking he should be obligated to return the beam itself, the sage instituted an ordinance for the penitent, according to which the thief or robber is not required to dismantle the building to return the beam. He may provide monetary restitution instead. And that's from Rambam Sefer Nazik and Hilch Gezeda Aveda 1.5 Shulchan Aruch Mikvah 361. That a robber has built into a large building, the court ruled that one should receive its value in money rather than demand that the robber demolish the house to return the beam itself, because the ordinance instituted for the penitent, e.g. to encourage robbers to admit their crime and to reimburse the owner of the stolen item. The Mishnah indicates that the only reason the robber does not have to return the beam itself is because of this ordinance instituted for the penitent. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you a very good day. All the best. Bye.